Hi everyone! Today I have another pretty blouse that I'm sewing and sharing with you. This is the Flora Blouse by Mood Sewciety. You can download this pattern for free on moodfabrics.com. I'll leave the link below so you can print it out and sew it with me today. There are pretty gathers all around the yoke, front and back, and a few French seams for nice clean finishes. I had a little extra fabric left over from the lining I used in my bomber jacket video, and this blouse was just perfect for the flowy, delicate fabric. This is definitely a unique pattern and I hope you sew along with me. Let's get started. You will need one yoke piece cut on the fold, two lower front bodices mirrored, and one lower back bodice cut on the fold, two lower sleeves, two button plackets, and two interfacing, one collar and one interfacing, two sleeve cuffs, and 8 buttons. Fuse your interfacing to the wrong sides of your button plackets and collar. For our first set of French seams, we're going to place our lower front pieces wrong sides together with our lower back piece. This is going to feel counterintuitive. It's the first step in finishing these clean seams. Pin the two 4-inch side seams. Now take it to your machine and sew these 4-inch portions with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now that I've sewn my side seams, I'm going to flip my front pieces over to face the back piece right sides together. Now that my front and back pieces are right sides together, I'm going to give these seams a good press and sew them again with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And now you have a nice clean seam on the inside. Now place your lower sleeve on top of the bodice, matching the armhole notches, wrong sides together, and pin. Continue pinning the sides of your armhole. Sew your lower arm seam with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now place the lower sleeve we just sewed so that it's facing your bodice right sides together. Press your lower arm seam and sew it again with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, just as we did for the lower bodice seam. Now we're going to take our bodice to our machine and baste the entire upper edge. Using the longest stitch on your machine, start from the end of your sleeve all the way across the back to the other end of the sleeve. Make sure that you leave tails at the beginning and at the end of your stitch so that you have thread to pull for gathering. And now I'm ready to attach the yoke to my bodice. We will not be doing a French seam here, so the pieces will be right sides together. Start by matching your notches. You will have a notch at the center back, the beginning of the sleeve, and pin at the end of the sleeve as well. Now it's time to pull those gathering threads and evenly distribute them between the notches. Once they match and your gathers are even, go ahead and pin. For the rest of the seam, do the same thing, match your notches, and pull the gathers to fit. Now that the yoke is all pinned, take it to your sewing machine and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across. To finish the seam I just sewed, I'm going to serge it, press it up toward the yoke, and then take it back to my sewing machine and top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching line so that I catch this seam when I sew. Before we attach the other side of our yoke to the lower front and sleeves, find your lower front and sleeve portions, take them to your machine and gather like we did for the back. Now that I've gathered my lower front and sleeve, I'm ready to attach the other side of the yoke. I've gone ahead and pinned at my notches, and now I'm going to gather and continue pinning all the way across just as we did on the other side. Do this for both lower fronts, sleeves, and yokes, stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then serge and top stitch that seam as we did for the other side. Now let's hem the bottom of our blouse. I'm going to serge the entire bottom of my blouse all the way around, press it up 1/4 inch to the inside, and then sew close to that serged edge all the way around. Now let's prepare our button plackets. We're going to take them to the ironing board, press them in half, and then press each long edge in 1/4 inch. Also, go ahead and press one of your short edges 1/4 inch. This will be the edge that attaches to the bottom of your shirt hem, giving us a clean finish. Now we can encase our center front inside of our button placket. Start pinning at your hem, making sure the end of your button placket is still folded under and tucked inside. Continue pinning all the way up. Now take it to your machine and edge stitch both button plackets, making sure that you're catching the other side of your placket on the inside as well. I've gone ahead and pressed my collar piece in half, and now I'm ready to attach it to the neckline. With right sides together, lay your collar on top of your neckline matching center backs and pin. Also pin at center fronts, allowing your neckband to extend over your button placket by 1/2 inch, and pin. Do the same for the other side. Continue pinning all the way across. Sew the collar to the neckline with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that my collar is attached, I'm going to fold the collar over on itself right sides together, tucking in the raw edge about 1/2 inch, and pinning. Now I'm going to sew this portion that's extending over the button placket, following the center front line. Do this for both sides. Take it to your machine and sew those 2 corners shut. Now that the edges are sewn, trim your seam allowance and clip the corner. Now flip your collar right side out. On the inside of your garment, tuck in the raw edge of your collar so that it lays right over that seam line, and pin. Now take it to your machine, and from the outside, stitch in the ditch all across the original seam, catching the inside collar as you go. Fold your cuff in half wrong sides together and press, matching long edges, and then open it back up and press one long edge 1/4 inch. The pressed edge will be on the inside of your cuff. Now that our cuffs are pressed and prepared, fold them in half right sides together along the short edges, and pin. Sew both short edges with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now place your cuffs right sides together with your armhole, match up your notch, and pin all the way around. Now that they're both pinned, sew both cuffs to your armholes with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that my cuff is attached, I'm going to fold it to the inside along the crease, tuck in those raw edges, and pin. Do this for both sleeves, and then sew all around the inside of your armhole close to the folded edge. Now the last thing to do is sew our buttonholes and attach our buttons. On the right button placket, I used a ruler and a marking pen to distance my buttonhole markings 2 inches apart from one another. All of the buttons are going vertically, except for the button on the collar. I have that going horizontally. And now I'm ready to sew. I finished sewing all of my buttonholes and I opened them up. And now I'm going to pin my right placket over my left so that I can mark where my buttons will go. You can use pins to mark where your buttons will go like I've done, or you could use your fabric marker again and just mark the center of that buttonhole. Now I'm ready to sew on my buttons. Thank you so much for watching this sew along. I'd love to hear what you thought of this blouse, so please let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next sew along.